is about to throw and decorate a set of these handsome mugs right now on DIY's Throwing Clay. Working with clay is Bill Van Gilder's passion. He's been throwing for more than 30 years. Making functional items that are attractive is a craft he knows well.
We're going to make a group of mugs. Now this is probably the most practical thing you'll ever learn to make in pottery. This is where form and function come together. And I'm going to show you how to make a really well-balanced mug. I'm going to show you how to make sets of them in that the height and the width are all going to be the same. I'm going to show you how to attach a handle, and we'll get some decoration on them.
To make each mug, you'll need 1 pound of clay, a wooden rib, a sponge on a stick, a pointed stick, a cut-off wire, a sanding pad, a mask, decorating brushes, some wax-resist emulsion, and glazes.
The first thing we've got to do is get our clay ready. I'm using 1 pound lumps. So let's get them over to the wheel and get started.
Rather than throw a single mug, Bill works in sets. The first mug establishes the dimensions for the set. These mugs are 4 3/4 inches tall and 4 inches wide when wet.
I'm going to show you a little trick on how to get the same sizes from mug to mug. We're going to use what we call a pointer. I'm going to use this chopstick and a piece of clay. I'm going to attach the clay at my wheel, insert the chopstick, and put it very near the rim, about 1/8 of an inch away. This is a point of reference for the next few mugs.
Working in sets is important for efficiency as well as aesthetics. Bill's put things to consider when making sets on DIYnetwork.com.
Now another tip on making these mugs. It's really important that the cross-section of the mug be very even. These mugs take a thermal shock as you hit them with hot coffee or boiling water, and an even wall thickness means a thermal shock will be absorbed and spread throughout the wall of the pot much easier. To achieve an even wall thickness, here's a little tip. Flatten your thumb on the wheel head and drive the tip of it about 1/2 inch under the foot of the pot. Tuck your fingertips into that groove and push that clay upward. That moves the clay up into the wall of the pot. When you first learn to make pots, you'll often make bottom-heavy pots. Using this technique will move that clay upward and alleviate that problem. The next step is using this wooden rib. Now this tool is going to be used in several ways to complete our mug. One is I'm going to undercut a groove at the foot of the mug. 2, I'm going to smooth the mug and shape it. I'm also compressing the surface, which makes for a stronger finished product. I want a nice smooth surface on the outside so I can decorate it later.
Bill smooths the outside surface with the long side of the wooden rib.
Next step is to remove the water that's collected on the inside of the mug. Now here's a little tip. I've taken this oil painter's brush and I've taken a thin piece of foam sponging, cut a strip, stretched it over the head of the brush, and just sealed it with a rubber band. This gives me 2 corners, which will get into the corners of my mug and remove all the water completely. The next step is to finish the rim of the mug. This is an important feature of the mug because it's the part that connects with your mouth. Now I've cut these wedges out of foam sponging and they give me a nice sharp corner which I can bend and drape over the rim of the mug. Gives it a nice smooth surface. I've also created a bevel at the top of the rim. That creates a slight angle which fits the corner of the mouth as you're using it. I created the bevel by my finger positions. Couple fingers on the outside, 2 fingers on the inside. The first finger is the top of the bevel. The second finger is right under the edge of the bevel.
To form the beveled edge, Bill presses the clay with his outside fingertips against his inside fingertips.
Now, I'm using quite a slow wheel speed at this point, and something I've noticed, that some clay is collected on my pointer, and that's real typical when you're learning to do this technique. You just have to pressure the outside of the rim inward just a little bit to get it away from the tip of the pointer. So let's get our mug cut from the wheel head, set on the board with the rest of our mugs. We're going to let them set up until they're leather hard, when we can trim them and get their handles put on.
When DIY's throwing clay continues, Bill reveals the fine art of handling a perfectly balanced mug. Welcome back to Throwing Clay. Bill is making a set of mugs. So far, he's thrown 6 mugs from 1-pound balls of clay. He used a wooden chopstick as a pointer to help him make uniform mugs. Bill was also careful to make the walls of the mugs an even thickness from top to bottom. Then he smoothed the rim with a sponge and made a beveled edge to ensure a comfortable rim from which to drink. Now that the mugs are leather hard, Bill's ready to trim them and attach handles.
I've got to stick the mug to the wheel head to do the trimming. So I'm going to create sort of tapered pad. I'm going to do that by just throwing a solid tapering lump. I'm going to clean off the surface with the rib. This creates a nice, dry, tacky surface. I'm going to turn the mug over onto this tapered pad. You see it's a little off-center. Tap it, get it in center, and give it a little pressure downward. The shape of this pad helps keep the rim centered. Now I'm just going to do a slight beveling at the foot, take off any sharp edges. I'm using these fingertips to hold the mug in place. I'm going to dampen my trim surface and use this short straight edge of the rib to smooth that surface. Another quick swipe with a sponge. Dry my hands and suddenly grasp it, and the mug comes free from the pad. Now if you've cleaned the pad completely, you shouldn't have any tackiness or clay attached to the rim.
Using the same clay pad or chuck, Bill trims the last mug in the set.
Now let's get some handles made. I'm going to use a lump of clay, about 1.5 pounds for a group of mugs. I'm going to shape it into a carrot, roll it a little flatter, and bring my water over here. Dip the clay into the water and not your hand. The cleaner you are putting handles on, the nicer your mugs will look.
Bill keeps the clay very wet. With the tip of his thumb, he creates lines on the handles.
What we're pulling here is what we call the handle blank. It's going to do some more stretching once we've attached it to the mug. So I just need the basic shape of it at this point. I'm tearing them off into about 3 or 4 inch lengths. That's going to stretch to be about a 5-inch handle. And I'm looking for a handle that's a little more than 1/4 of an inch thick. I'm also looking for a handle that's about 1 1/4 inch wide. You want to make your handles rounded at the edge rather than squared, a little bit soft and round on the back side with the grooves on the front side. You want to be sure to set your handles on a nice, clean, dry surface. You want to keep your hands clean when you're handling leather hard pots. They're still a little bit soft and they'll pick up bits of clay at this stage. Okay, let's get the handles attached to the mugs. The mug is still soft leather hard, and that's okay. That means we'll have a good attachment. Pick up my first handle, clean hand. Take my thumb and cut the clay off over my first finger. This produces a really flat surface. That's the part that's going to connect with the mug. I'm going to put a drop of water on that flat surface, just enough to get it tacky. Support the mug at the inside of the rim and pressure the clay up against the rim of the mug. Tuck it in a little bit. I don't necessarily have to smear this handle clay onto the mug. I kind of like showing where the joint is. It shows a little bit of the plasticity of the material. Dip the handle in water and do a little bit more pooling. Again, I redefine the grooves. Tip the mug and curve the handle, attaching it lightly at the bottom. When you attach your handle to the bottom, the next important thing to look at is this inside space. It's got to be big enough to fit at least 2 fingers, if not 3 fingers, without those fingertips bumping up against the hot surface of the mug. The next thing we're going to do is securely connect the base of the handle to the base of the mug. I'm going to use this dowel. I'm just going to squash this area somewhat flat, but again, I like to see a little line that shows you where this handle joins the mug. When we first learn to pull handles, often they drag or sag down the side of the pot. And this negative space is an important part of the design of this cup. So I'm going to put a wet finger inside and lift that mug handle back up. Much nicer space and a better space to fit 2 or 3 fingers. Make sure the mug is round and make sure the handle cuts the mug directly in half, that it's not leaning this side or that side. Last thing to do is put my signature stamp on the bottom of the mug. It's just a mark of who made this piece.
Next on DIY's Throwing Clay, Bill uses a fancy brush and a delicate touch to glaze a striking set of mugs. Welcome back to Throwing Clay. Bill Van Gilder is making mugs. He started with a 1-pound ball of clay and threw a basic cylinder. He pulled the wall a uniform 1/4 inch thick. Then he beveled the rim and smoothed it with a sponge to make a nice smooth surface from which to drink. When the mugs were leather hard, he inverted one on a clay chuck and trimmed a beveled edge. Then he pulled several handle blanks from a wet piece of clay using his thumb to cut decorative grooves. He attached the handle blank to the top of the mug. Then he dipped the end in water and stretched it until the handle was about 5 inches long. With a wooden dowel, he secured the handle to the bottom of the mug. A slight upward lift with a wet finger gave the handle its final shape. Then Bill put the mugs aside to dry for about 48 hours until they were bone dry.
Before I load the mugs into the bisque kiln, I'm checking the rims for any roughness. This is the part of the mug that's going to touch your lips. I'm going to rub each of the rims very lightly with this green scrubby pad. But before I do that, I'm going to put a mask on. It's never good to breathe airborne clay dust particles. Okay, let's get our mugs into the kiln.
The kiln fires at about 1750 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 12 hours. Then it cools for at least 24 hours before Bill can unload the mugs.
We're now going to get our mugs glazed. We're going to use 2 different patterns, and I'm going to show you a technique called wax resist. First one's quite a simple pattern. The second one, a bit more fancy. I've decided to use these 2 glazes, green and the black. When we overlap the green onto the black, we get this cool blue-looking color. The first step is getting wax on the base of our mugs. So let's get that done.
With a narrow foam brush, Bill applies wax-resist emulsion. He uses a banding wheel to get a neat, even wax line.
Now we've got to work the wax into every little nook and cranny on the bottom of these mugs. Those wiggle wires make a lot of grooves. Now it's going to take about 5 minutes for the wax to dry. While that's drying, let's get our glazes ready. But I want to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a black glaze on first, wax resist on top of it, and then make a second dip in the green. Then you're going to see the wax resist come to life. I'm going to hold at the rim, dip for 3 seconds, and out. You can see easily how the glazes run right off the waxed area. Touch up where I was holding it, and let it dry. You can see how quickly these mugs dry. It takes about 30 seconds. Any of the beads of glaze that get attached to the bottom have to be removed. So I'm using a damp sponge and wipe the bottoms of the pots.
Glaze on the bottom of the mugs would fuse the mugs to the kiln shelf during the high-temperature firing. Bill is careful to clean or fettle the bottom of each pot after dipping it in glaze.
Now we're ready to decorate them. This is the best part. This wax resist technique brings out the creativity in you, so give it a try. The wax I'm using for this decorating technique is a different wax than I used on the bottoms of the mugs. This is an oil-based wax. This one was water-based. And I'm going to do the simpler decoration first, a little bit of practicing before I get complicated. I'm going to use a thinner brush and put a fine line next to the main lines that I've just put on here. I really like this brush. It's a handmade bamboo and elk hair brush. Now, the next one's going to get a bit more complicated. But I am going to follow a pattern, and I'll try and explain it as I go. I'm going to put a stalk down first, and on that stalk, I'm going to put some leaves. And I'm going to use a repeating pattern. 1, 2, And 3, different types of brush tips will give you different brush strokes on your pot. It's great to have a collection of brushes. Just going to liven it up a little bit with a few dots here and there. They break up the pattern a little bit.
Bill mixes up the green glaze.
Okay, let's get the second dip on these mugs. The second dip is always pretty fast. In and out. Yeah, I like the way the dots have broken up the pattern. In about 30 seconds, these mugs will be dry too. Then we'll be able to get them into the kiln for their high temperature glaze firing.
Next on DIY's Throwing Clay, we visit with a brush maker who specializes in rare and exotic hairs. Welcome back to Throwing Clay. Susan Nayfield Kahn is a potter and brush maker who lives and works in Frederick, Maryland. The brushes are works of art in themselves, and her specialty is making brushes for ceramics.
Well, one way that a potter makes his or her pots distinctive is through specialized decoration. Specific potter's work can be recognized around the world just by the brushstrokes or the decoration that he or she chooses. But potters have different needs. They're not using thin inks or thin paints. They're using thick slips that are suspensions of clay and water. They're not painting on flat surfaces. They're painting on curved surfaces that are frequently moving as they're painting. And they need to make long strokes often for their decorative effects and can't run out of slip or oxide or whatever they're applying to the pots for decoration. So they need a brush that has the ability to hold a lot of the material that you're applying. And the usual Western artist brushes just don't do this well for potters. I took apart a lot of old brushes to find out how they had been constructed, and I experimented with a lot of different animal hairs and techniques for putting the brushes together. One of the more common hairs used in Japan is hair from deer tail, and this is an example of a white-tailed deer. This hair is very resilient, and because it's long, has the ability to hold a lot of slip or glaze material, and has been used by the Japanese for centuries to make these large teardrop-shaped brushes called dame-fude. This was a very good brush to use for decorating pottery. One characteristic of this brush is that it has a very, very narrow tip that can make a fine line, but with a little bit of pressure can make a much, much broader line. But the other thing this brush does very well is that it makes little droplets of glaze or decoration. In other words, it makes dots in a series.
It's important to protect the brush tuft when it's not in use. To learn how to make your own bamboo brush holder, visit DIYnetwork.com.
You can actually use different woods for the handles. Bamboo is very good for the handles because it is one of the hardest and most durable woods available. It's inexpensive, and the nice part of it for a brush maker is that it's hollow, so you don't have to drill or shape the handle to make an area in which you set your tuft, and it withstands the frequent wetting and drying very well.
While Susan enjoys sharing her knowledge of brush making with others, pottery remains her first love.
I began brush making because I really couldn't find anything that gave me what I needed to make my pots my own. This has just really given me a new dimension to explore in terms of decorating a lot of my work.
Bill used 2 brushes Susan made to decorate these mugs. Now he's ready to load them into the kiln for the high temperature firing. The kiln will fire for 10 to 12 hours and cool for at least 24 hours before it's safe to open the lid and unload it.
That's great, and it'll taste even better out of a mug you've made yourself.